Ladies and gentlemen, this is Data-Driven Design Day 2016 and very much welcome here. My name is Lassi Liikkanen and this year I've been trying to pursue two ideas. This is the other one. I'm very happy to see so many of you here today coming in for some sort of interest in data, design and related issues. We are unfortunately maybe a few minutes behind the schedule because we've been tackling quite a lot of different kind of technical problems here for the last hour. That has been kind of the general spirit of the whole process for the last month or so, but luckily I think we're going to manage just fine. A few words about what how we're going to run here today. Here in my presentation, I'm going to go through three different themes. First, trying to convince you, maybe once more, that it's very important that we're all here today thinking about and talking about this topic. Then I'm going to introduce you some of the work I've been recently pulling together around tools for data-driven design. And then finally giving a few concrete words about how today is organized. Let's get down to the business. I think there's hardly any more interesting topic today and around this time than data. There's been quite a lot of hype around data. For instance, the present CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, was recently giving an address which was titled "Data is the New Electricity." And a lot of people are kind of associating a lot of meaning and value and expectations towards data. For instance, calling that the data is the fuel that will drive the fourth industrial revolution. It's not the revolution by itself, but it's certainly something that's necessary to make it happen. But I think one of the big questions, particularly if you're working in a consultancy, but also in a companies that are trying to kind of stay ahead of the digitalization game, is that how you actually make some value out of data. Because we've been collecting different type of data for about a pretty long time. I mean, this kind of the origins of business intelligence, everything goes back to quite a few decades. However, at present, I think we're kind of seeing that the value of data, at least how I personally see it, is being produced from two different kind of streams. For one, we have what I call smart products that are being built using the kind of state-of-the-art machine learning, artificial intelligence approaches that will directly take your data and make some useful products out of it. Then again, we have different kind of branch operation mode, which is the data-driven decisions, in which we take data, process it further in order to create insights that will allow us to do things better, whether it's about business, design, marketing, or whatever. You could say that there are kind of two different beasts here, which might be associated with some sort of labels such as these. The data science is clearly an emerging discipline. We have kind of a lot of new postings in data scientists in Finland as well. This has been kind of happening only in the last few years. Maybe in a short while we'll see more demand for data-driven designers as well. Well, tell you the truth, I don't really think that this whole issue is maybe that clear-cut. You could probably argue that the kind of how the data is producing value, there are more streams to it. But for today's sake, let's try to keep up the solution that we have, this kind of data science and other types of disciplines around in quite convincing manner. And my kind of personal view into what data-driven design is that it's about making informed decisions to advance design goals. I'm not sure if that sounds too much, I think, but there's one important thing here, why I'm not calling this day the day of growth hacking or today of a conversion optimization. That's the notion of design. And I think one of the important things about design is the yielding the power. For instance, in this case, the power that we have from data in a responsible manner, having some sort of ethical view into it. Or at least that's what I hope so. Now, my reason for organizing this event has been that it's not kind of self-evident how you kind of go about. As said, we've been storing data and we are actually, at the moment we're sitting here, we're creating more and more data every minute. And it's kind of clear that there's no magical process that would automatically turn and squeeze this value out of the data. You have to find some sort of way, and I think the thing is, at least at the moment, there's no kind of single answer into how you start doing data-driven design and how you kind of create your data-informed decisions. There are quite a lot of different roads. That's why we need some sort of good guidance, good examples, good instruction where to go and how to do it. And I think that's the reason why we're all here today. As some of you may know, this event is the second of its class. Last year, with a kind sponsorship of SC5, we organized the Data-Driven Design Day 2015 at the Design Museum. You can still find the recordings out of that session from YouTube. There's a playlist under the name of the same title, Data-Driven Design Day 2015. The theme last year was the digital web services, and this year we're focusing on apps. And I think things have been kind of developing very nicely. We have like 3-digit growth in our audience, thanks to you. So thanks for showing up. This is much better. I was actually running an experiment of trying to figure out how we could reduce the number of no-shows that we had last year. And I think, judging by the number of empty seats, I think this worked out pretty well. There are hardly any free seats in the audience today, so thank you for showing up. As said, today we're going to hear quite a few interesting talks that concern applications, but it's not only applications though. And I'm very happy that we have been able to kind of get the people who I wanted to talk about the data-driven design. So I don't think there could be any better program for the event here today. So going back to last year, as I said, last year we were discussing mostly about web service development. And after a quite long procrastination, I just very recently did some sort of synthesis about this, trying to kind of squeeze out what I learned and what I've been personally trying to pursue and through trial and error about the use of data-driven design tools. A couple of weeks ago, this came out as a blog post at Futurice website called Tools for Data-Driven Design. And I'm going to give you a basic outline of what were my main claims in this web post. First of all, I'm making some sort of division between two types of tools. First part is about the data acquisition and interpretation. This is mostly about how we can get the data that we need and what we do when we have the data. Then the other kind of big thing is what might be called generative design. And this is about maybe more like data science, about producing designs using data in some sort of intelligent manner. But last year, most of our examples were about data acquisition. And here we have two basic modes of how you can get data. How many of you are familiar with this kind of picture? Basic idea. Who has seen it? Yeah. This is the infamous NPS score measurement that a lot of the sites are nowadays using, actively polling about people's behavior. But this is not probably the most interesting or novel example of what data-driven design is. The second way of collecting data is probably much more prominent, and that's kind of passive storing of user data, also called spying on users. And this is what all of the major websites do, more or less. There's been quite a lot of big talks about how responsible, for instance, big-scale experiments that the big internet companies run on users are. I'm actually not going to dwell into this debate today, but I think it's kind of important to keep in mind, particularly if you're trying to kind of maintain your designerly ethics while you're working. But let's have a quick look at what kind of tools there are available. I personally like to say that in my analysis, I kind of see 5 different types of tools that are being used currently to do data-driven web development. And here in the order of increasing usefulness, I've kind of put on top of the list different types of screen recordings and different types of heat maps. And I think the value with them is that for designers, they give some sort of an idea what the users are doing and why they are doing what they're doing on your website or in your service. Then we have other types of tools which allow you to record what people do, what sort of things work, what sort of things don't work. But the problem is that they usually lack the insight about why your ideas aren't working. I'm going to briefly show you about how these kind of tools look like. For instance, here's an example from a solution called Hotjar, which will enable you to record in a screenshot manner sessions from a user's web browser and then play them back at your own convenience, at your chosen speed. And then you can kind of observe every click and every scroll that the user makes in the browser. And this might sometimes make it quite obvious what sort of problems you're having on your website if people aren't suddenly kind of finding their way to your shopping cart or pressing the wrong button in order to kind of order more stuff. Their problem clearly is the privacy, because these kind of techniques capture all information, more or less, that the people enter, and therefore you might, as a researcher, be kind of stung into quite inconvenient situations where you have more information than you probably bargained for. The other part, now here called heat maps, basically I'm talking about click heat maps because heat mapping is just a general data visualization technique for making things visible. But this can be also quite useful about revealing where people's interests lie and where it doesn't lie. A lot of different kind of software. This is from a crazy egg. Solutions are quite various and been around for a long time. Then I think one of the kind of interesting, neither that new. Different forms of A/B testing have been available for ages. The problem with them is usually that they are quite challenging to implement. But nowadays there are more tools, such as this is from Visual Website Optimizer, which allows basically UX designers with minimal front-end development skills to run experiments in A/B or multivariate setting and figure out what sort of changes in interface might be useful. The good part is that this makes this kind of approach very like a low threshold for designers, even smaller organizations. Fourthly, we have different type of design variations. This actually goes towards the generative design, so that there are software that allow you to generate and try out different solutions. This example is from a software called Optimal Sort, or actually SaaS, SaaS service, which allows you to kind of try out different type of menu hierarchies and what sort of menus would serve the users the best. So this is more like active, informed data collection or crowdsourcing your design in order to find some sort of intuitive menu structures. Just one example. And the final example is the traditional web analytics, which I've kind of placed in the kind of lowest category of them all. How many organizations, so this screenshot is from Google Analytics, how many of you are working in an organization or working for an organization that uses Google Analytics? As you know, oh God, almost everyone. That's actually not a surprise. I think there was just recently kind of information that almost 60% of the kind of big web properties, at least in the Western world, use Google Analytics. I think one of the main reasons is that it comes for free, and nowadays it's a pretty extensive package. But unfortunately, I also see that main features that it's usually kind of used for are quite useless for designers. There are some points which it's good for, but in a way, I think there are kind of reasons why it's here at the bottom of the list. Okay, I'm not going to talk more about that. You can read the whole story from the blog or from my LinkedIn Pulse post. Overall, I think that these kind of collections tools are just a start for the data-driven design. In the future, I expect that we will see more different kind of tools that first assist and later on maybe even complement or replace the human designer. Here's one example with quite a loud background soundtrack. Thank you, guy who behind the mixer. We can turn down the volume. I can assure you it didn't sound like that back home when I was playing through the MacBook. Nevertheless, this is software from Aalto University, experimental prototype about a layout design solution from Antti Oulasvirta's research group, which is supposed to help UI designers to create layouts with computer assistance in order to find optimal layouts for instance, web design. And I think a lot of you have probably heard about the GRID project, which is kind of a solution that claims to be able to use artificial intelligence in order to create whole or redesign content-based websites. I think the project is currently in production, but I haven't really heard any reviews, so I kind of still consider this as kind of niche or rather kind of curiosity. I think that anyways, the tools that people use currently for data-driven design are still kind of lacking some respect in UX. For instance, Google Analytics is kind of a bad example in that sense. But let's try to lift them. Then my final story related to data-driven design and what's essential. Because I don't think that the tools, even though as much as I wanted to talk about them today, are not necessarily the end of the whole story. Here's an example from about I'd say 4 years ago, when two internet giants, namely Amazon and Netflix, both decided that they would use data in order to create a new television hit series. And what happened? Well, I think some of you probably already guessed what happened with Netflix, but let me tell you the story of the Amazon. Amazon decided that they would make a call for propositions for several pilot series, and then put them on the Amazon streaming service, and then kind of see from the statistics that how people actually like these pilot series. And then they picked two of them for further development, released first season and even second season, but it didn't turn out that great. What they did, or they ended up creating, was called Alpha House. How many of you have heard about this? One brave soul. I'm not surprised. How about this one? House of Cards? Yeah, I think this kind of wins 1 to 150. House of Cards was also based on data, but from a very different process. It was based on data so that the Netflix people analyzed quite a lot of data about what sort of characters, what sort of plots, which actors, which producers people like, and then used their designerly wits to kind of make the decisions about what sort of series they should produce. And the differences were quite radical. Even though 7.6 is not that bad sounding score for the series, but on the IMDb television series data curve, it's pretty much the average as you can get. So you'll probably find a couple of thousand of different TV series between here and between the House of Cards. So in the end, I think the tools will come and go, and I expect that we'll see quite interesting development over the next few years. But I don't think that the success will eventually depend on which tools you choose to use. I think it will depend on which questions you ask. They will hopefully matter the most, because you can always get a kind of some sort of answer, but it doesn't necessarily make any sense. Okay, now it's time to hear what the tools and questions today's other speakers have to offer. So from my part, thank you.